9 guests who genuinely creeped out Johnny Carson. For 3 unforgettable decades, Johnny Carson ruled late-night television. Over 22,000 guests took a seat on The Tonight Show couch. Movie legends, political powerhouses, comedy giants, and everyday oddities with the strangest talents you could imagine. And through it all, Carson's charm, razor-sharp wit, and cool curiosity made him the unshakable king of television. But even Johnny had his limits. Behind that easy smile and calm composure was a man with an uncanny radar for human behavior, a sixth sense that could pick up on energy shifts the audience might miss. Those who worked closely with him knew if Johnny's posture stiffened, if his laugh came a little too late, or his eyes darted just a bit too long. Something about the guest had thrown him off. Johnny could stay composed no matter what chaos was unfolding on camera, one longtime Tonight Show producer recalled. But offstage, he'd occasionally admit that certain guests genuinely unsettled him. Not because they were rude or difficult. He could handle that. It was something deeper, something off. These weren't your typical awkward interviews. These were the moments when even television's most unflappable host felt a chill crawl down his spine. From manic energy to eerie silence, from unsettling stares to incoherent ramblings. These 9 guests managed to rattle Johnny Carson in ways few ever did. And it all begins with one appearance so strange, so haunting, that Carson later described it as if he'd been speaking not to a person, but to a ghost from another world. Klaus Kinski. Klaus Kinski, wild-eyed rage. When German actor Klaus Kinski walked onto the Tonight Show stage in the late 1970s, the air changed. Known for his explosive performances in Werner Herzog's Aguirre, The Wrath of God, and Nosferatu the Vampire, Kinski carried with him an energy that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. From the second he appeared, a strange voltage filled the room, an invisible storm that had even Johnny Carson visibly on edge. He had these wild, unblinking eyes, recalled one stage manager. It was like watching a man possessed. You didn't know if he was going to start a monologue or a riot. Carson, usually the calm master of late-night charm, leaned back in his chair that night, clearly trying to keep a safe distance. What began as a routine interview about Kinski's latest film spiraled into a feverish tirade about art, God, and the coming apocalypse. Every time Johnny tried to lighten the mood, Kinski cut him down with a glare so fierce the audience gasped out loud. Behind the scenes, producers whispered urgently. Security was on high alert. We didn't know if he'd finish the segment or flip the desk, one crew member admitted. Johnny was tense. He was thinking about how to end the show without setting Kinski off. Through it all, Carson's professionalism never cracked, though you could see the fear in his eyes. Later, Ed McMahon revealed that Johnny confessed he'd felt like he was sitting next to a live bomb. He told me, "I wasn't doing an interview. I was trying to prevent a public meltdown." A cameraman who worked that night described Kinski's stare as a storm you could feel building behind the eyes, a kind of beautiful, destructive madness. The encounter became legend. For years afterward, whenever a difficult guest was scheduled, producers would calm Carson with one reminder. "Don't worry, Johnny. No one's ever worse than Kinski." Robert Blake, cold stare, colder energy. By the time he walked onto the Tonight Show stage, Blake was already a Hollywood veteran, celebrated for the haunting realism of In Cold Blood and his streetwise charm in Beretta. But that night, what the audience expected was nostalgia. What they got was ice. From the moment he sat down, the air in the studio shifted. A writer who was there recalled, "He didn't just act distant. He radiated hostility." Every question for Johnny Carson was met with clipped sarcasm or an eerie, drawn-out silence. When Carson tried humor, Blake didn't even smirk. He just stared. That stare. Cold, flat, predatory. One crew member described it as the look of a man mentally measuring distance. Not for conversation, but for confrontation. Carson, ever the professional, tried every trick in his arsenal. Charm, curiosity, even sympathy. Nothing worked. Blake sat unervingly still, barely blinking, his calm voice dripping with contempt. "Why would you ask me that?" He shot back more than once. The audience, sensing danger, fell silent. The laughter died. Even the band shifted uncomfortably. Behind the scenes, Johnny's team could see it. The tight smile, the nervous glance at his note cards, the subtle lean back in his chair, as though putting space between himself and something dangerous. After the show, Carson told the producer, "I didn't feel like I was interviewing him. I felt like I was being studied." Like Prey, Blake was never invited back. Years later, when headlines exposed the actor's dark legal troubles, Carson reportedly sighed and said, "I'm not surprised." That night, there was something truly off about him. "I've never been so relieved to end an interview." It wasn't just an awkward appearance. It was a glimpse into the unsettling undercurrent of a man whose darkness had begun to leak through the cracks. Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman as Tony Clifton. Pure, unpredictable chaos. By the time Andy walked onto the Tonight Show stage in the early 80s dressed as his abrasive alter ego, lounge singer Tony Clifton, he was already known for breaking every rule of comedy. But nothing prepared Johnny Carson for what unfolded that night. Clifton stumbled onto the set in a wrinkled tuxedo, a cheap wig slipping over his forehead, dark glasses hiding his eyes, and the overpowering scent of cologne trailing behind him. From the start, he was loud, rude, and completely out of control. He insulted Ed McMahon, made crude remarks about female staffers, and interrupted Carson at every turn. What began as a performance quickly spiraled into something far darker. A scene so uncomfortable it left even the unflappable Carson shaken. It wasn't just that he was obnoxious, one writer recalled. It felt like we were watching someone lose their mind, except it was all part of the act. Kaufman never broke character, not once. His bizarre, rambling responses to Carson's questions blurred the line between performance and breakdown, leaving the audience unsure whether to laugh or cringe. The breaking point came when Clifton, furious at the band's accompaniment to his off-key crooning, hurled a glass of water at Doc Severinsen. Carson, visibly rattled, did something he almost never did. He walked off his own set. Ed McMahon was left to corral the chaos as security dragged Clifton off stage, still cursing and shouting. When Carson returned after the commercial break, his composure was gone. "I've dealt with drunks, divas, and meltdowns," he told his crew later, "but I've never seen anything like that. It was like talking to someone who doesn't live in our reality." After that night, Andy Kaufman was welcomed back, but Tony Clifton was permanently banned. As one producer summed it up, Johnny could handle difficult, but Clifton wasn't just difficult, he was disturbing. George Jessel. George Jessel, the racist relic who shook the Tonight Show. George Jessel was a relic of another age, an old-school vaudeville performer and film producer whose career stretched back to the earliest days of show business. By the time he appeared on The Tonight Show in the early 1970s, he was well into his 70s, a living echo of a bygone entertainment era. What Johnny Carson didn't expect, however, was that Jessel's visit would become one of the most painfully awkward moments in the show's history. Jessel came from a time when racial and ethnic jokes were considered acceptable stage material, a grim reality of early 20th century entertainment. But by the 1970s, the world had changed. Those same jokes weren't just outdated, they were offensive. Carson, known for keeping his show sharp, modern, and respectful, had no idea what was about to unfold. After a warm introduction, Carson invited Jessel to reflect on his long career. But instead of the nostalgic storytelling everyone anticipated, Jessel launched into what one crew member later described as a greatest hits reel of the most appalling material imaginable. His monologue overflowed with racial slurs, tired stereotypes, and humor that belonged to a time best left buried. The studio audience froze. It wasn't the silence of a bad joke, recalled a cameraman. It was the silence of shock, the kind that makes you feel the air get heavier. Carson's smile locked in place, a mask of politeness concealing panic. He was trapped. If he confronted Jessel, he'd risk humiliating an elderly man on national TV. If he laughed along, he'd look complicit, and cutting the segment mid-show would only make things worse. Finally, desperate to regain control, Carson abruptly cut to commercial. When the cameras returned, Jessel was gone. The next guest was already seated. Backstage, Carson was furious. "That's not what this show stands for," he told his producer. "Never again. Not on my watch." Jessel was quietly blacklisted from The Tonight Show, and the staff introduced stricter pre-interviews for vintage performers. But what haunted Carson most wasn't just the offensive jokes. It was the eerie sense that Jessel had stepped out of another century, oblivious to how deeply the world had changed around him. As one longtime producer put it, it wasn't just uncomfortable. It was like watching history refuse to die. From that night on, whenever producers debated inviting a controversial guest, one warning always echoed through the room. "Careful, we don't want another Jessel situation." Vincent Price. Vincent Price, the master of elegance and eeriness. Unlike most guests who graced The Tonight Show, Price wasn't just welcomed, he was celebrated. The silver-tongued horror legend carried with him a strange magnetism, a blend of refined wit and spine-tingling darkness that made even Johnny Carson both laugh and shiver. Crew members often whispered that Carson adored Price, but was quietly uneasy in his presence. He could be talking about soufflés or painting, one producer recalled. And then, boom, he'd drop into that grave, velvety horror voice, and you'd see Johnny physically pull back. Price had a rare gift. He could glide effortlessly from genteel charm to gothic menace. In one unforgettable appearance, he read Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven under flickering candlelight. As his tone deepened and the studio lights dimmed, Carson's grin slowly vanished. For a few seconds, the director remembered, Johnny forgot it was television. It felt like something supernatural had entered the room. Even off script, Price loved to toy with that tension. He once gifted Carson a taxidermy bat in a glass case, and the host's forced smile said it all. On another night, he reached across the desk mid-story, gripping Johnny's wrist while whispering a gruesome line. Carson jumped so high the crew nearly lost it. Still, Carson couldn't resist inviting him back. There was a thrill in being spooked by Vincent Price, the way he made terror feel like theater, danger feel like charm. As Johnny later joked, "Vincent's the only man who can scare you half to death and make you hope he'll do it again next week." Margot Hemingway. Margot Hemingway, the disturbing spiral. In the late 1970s, Margot Hemingway seemed untouchable, a dazzling supermodel, the face of Fabergé's Babe perfume, and the glamorous granddaughter of literary legend Ernest Hemingway. Her beauty was luminous, her charm magnetic. When she appeared on The Tonight Show, audiences saw a confident, radiant star. But by the early 1980s, something had changed. Her final appearance on the show became one of the most haunting moments in late-night history. She was supposed to be there promoting a film, recalled one producer. But the moment she walked on stage, you could tell something was terribly wrong. Margot's speech was scattered, her eyes glassy and unfocused, her energy disoriented, like she was drifting between two worlds. Johnny Carson, known for his composure, looked more concerned than confused. It wasn't the behavior of a diva. It was the quiet unraveling of a woman in distress. As the interview went on, Margot's disconnection became almost unbearable to watch. She'd begin answering a question, then fall silent mid-sentence, staring blankly into space before jolting back to awareness. At times, she responded to questions Johnny never asked, as if she were hearing another conversation entirely. The audience, normally quick with laughter, fell into uneasy silence. You could hear the tension in the air, the sound of hundreds of people realizing they were witnessing something deeply human and terribly sad. Carson did everything he could to steady the moment, asking simple, gentle questions, but Margot's replies wandered through fragmented thoughts and half-memories. Johnny wasn't annoyed. A staff writer remembered. He was worried. You could see it in his face. He knew something was wrong beyond what anyone could fix in that moment. After the show, the crew was shaken. When someone joked about her being out of it, Carson cut them off. "That wasn't someone being difficult," he said quietly. "That was someone in trouble." Years later, when Margot Hemingway tragically took her own life in 1996, Those who had been there that night remembered that episode with a chill. It hadn't been just another awkward television moment. It was a cry for help, broadcast live before millions. Johnny sensed it. A producer reflected. He wasn't disturbed by her behavior. He was disturbed by her pain. Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol, the dead-eyed silence. When Andy Warhol appeared on The Tonight Show in the early 1980s, it wasn't chaos or scandal that made it unforgettable. It was silence. Cold, deliberate, unnerving silence. Those who were there still talk about it as one of the most haunting interviews Johnny Carson ever faced. Warhol's appearance wasn't really an interview, recalled one producer. It was performance art. From the moment he took his seat, the air in the studio changed. He barely spoke. And when he did, it was in one-word replies, slow and flat, like echoes from another world. His unblinking stare cut right through Carson, as if the host were invisible. Carson tried everything: humor, curiosity, charm. But Warhol refused to play the game. He smiled faintly at jokes, never laughed, never elaborated. The audience grew restless. People shifted in their seats, coughed, exchanged uneasy glances. No one knew what they were watching, said a cameraman. Was it genius? Was it awkwardness? Or was it something darker? At one point, Carson, visibly thrown off, asked, "Do you even want to be here?" Warhol merely shrugged. A tiny, ambiguous gesture that somehow said everything and nothing at once. Backstage, someone whispered, "It's like interviewing a statue." Carson later joked, that man could have been made of wax, but the laugh didn't hide his discomfort. Unlike other infamous guests, the angry ones, the drunk ones, the unpredictable ones, Warhol's power came from absence. He created what one director called an existential vacuum. A strange, frozen stillness that seemed to swallow time itself. It wasn't hostility, the director added. It was dread, quiet, philosophical dread. Carson thrived on connection. That night, he found none. It felt, he later said, like talking to a ghost who knew something you didn't. Afterward, he paced backstage, half frustrated, half fascinated. Either that was the worst interview I've ever done, he told his producer, or the most brilliant, and I can't decide which one scares me more. Among the Tonight Show staff, the segment became legend, the ultimate test of silence. Carson would later joke about other difficult guests, but he never again mentioned Warhol. The encounter had gone beyond awkwardness. It had touched something deeper, something eerie, intangible, and unforgettable.